In the quiet hills of the English countryside, a man goes missing. Later found dead, police are baffled. Rumors swirl of a secret society gathering at the ancient rock formation. Is this a supernatural thriller or a simple murder mystery? Or both? The people of the village aren't talking and neither are the stones. Killer Mystery presents Season 3, The Silent Stones.
The Murder Shelf Book Club contains disturbing content related to real-life crimes. Listener discretion is advised.
The average lifespan of a serial killer in the 80s was 10 years. Now it's about 2 years, but that's because of the advancements of law enforcement. It does make it a little bit more difficult with known prostitutes because they do disappear sometimes, and they're not kept track of as much as, let's say, someone else. And that's the reality, unfortunately, of the situation. But their cases are taken seriously. Each case is taken seriously. It's just that, unfortunately, they do make victims that are not recognized that they're gone until the next day. It may take a week or two, and by then, psychologist Dr. Lawrence J. Simon, author of Murder by the Numbers, Perspectives on Serial Sexual Violence, from The Baby Doll Serial Killer, The John Eric Armstrong Homicides by B.R. Bates with Gerald Cliff, Ph.D. Welcome to the Murder Shelf Book Club podcast. I am your host, Jill. This is the conclusion of The Baby Doll Serial Killer, The John Eric Armstrong Homicides by B.R. Bates and Gerald Cliff, episode 115, Unsafe Harbor, Part 3, Second Cast. This case, the duplicity, the Jekyll-Hyde ideation, it is difficult, it is unnerving, and it makes us wonder about everyone we perceive as a nice guy. In parts 1 and 2, we saw naval veteran John Eric Armstrong confess and confess and confess to strangling prostitutes. And while he's tried and convicted for the murders and assaults in Detroit, Dearborn, and Dearborn Heights, Michigan, his murders overseas across the world are yet to be resolved. Knowing something and proving it legally are two very different things. So March 1st, 1998, the USS Nimitz docked in Newport News, Norfolk, Virginia. John Eric Armstrong, called Eric, and fellow seaman and fiancée Katie planned to rent an apartment as they prepared to separate from the Navy. It was in July or August 1998 that Eric met his last victim before moving to Michigan. She was a white female wearing jeans and a t-shirt. After paying her $50, they had sex, and he pushed her out of the Jeep Wrangler onto the street, possibly running over her as he departed. At the time, he told Katie and the police that he had been robbed. But remember that Eric is very wishy-washy in his recall of dates, and he will refer to Katie as his wife, although they were not married until later that fall, and this is happening during that summer. Eric wasn't sure if he had killed this woman, who he thought was named Susie or Susan. He suspected he strangled her after his father's face appeared before him, a detail that had come up several other times. Like the women he killed in Waikiki, Hawaii, Eric had been with this prostitute several times in the past. So why did she end up dead this time? Well, the digging began, and investigators would link this confession to a real confirmed murder. What emerged from the research were possible Armstrong victims, but that didn't match perfectly with the details shared by this confessed killer. One such case involved Lynette Ann Hillig, a 34-year-old woman who was found dead March 5, 1998, in the parking lot of a Norfolk bingo parlor in a sketchy neighborhood, which aligns with Armstrong's chosen hunting ground. Of importance was that the Nimitz had just recently arrived in port. Now, Lynette was the third child in her family, following her twin sisters, Kathleen and Doreen. They described Lynette as a very happy child, growing up in a good family, who was called Linny Bell by her dad. She participated in various sports at the local country club. However, school was more challenging for Lynette, with her confidence taking a hit. Some of her teachers were not supportive and resulted in Lynette developing anorexia nervosa, which was not widely recognized at the time. That's the eating disorder. We hear quite a lot about it now, but certainly not back in the 1990s. Graduating, Lynette took a job at a drugstore, sharing an apartment in Rochester, New York, with her sister Kathleen. Known for her kind heart, Lynette often fed the homeless and cheered for the underdog. Moving to Florida, Lynette met a sailor named Jeff, whom she married, and they had a daughter named Sarah. Quote, Sarah was her world. She loved being a mother, end quote, a close friend once said. But sadly, alcohol soon became a problem in Jeff and Lynette's lives, leading them to move back to New York to be with family. With Jeff deploying overseas for a desert storm, the marriage deteriorated further, eventually resulting in Sarah living with her paternal side of the family. Left unaware of where her daughter was, unable to contact her, Lynette was emotionally devastated, and she started smoking marijuana and drank excessively as she spiraled deeper into despair. Later, Lynette's autopsy would indicate that she had died from blunt force trauma, likely resulting from a car accident. One detail from the report noted that she had been struck by a vehicle that was, quote, higher than normal, end quote. Well, perhaps it was a Jeep Wrangler? Sister Kathleen told B.R. Bates that she remembered being told about additional signs of a beating and strangulation, and that Lynette had been murdered. Now, unfortunately, the Hillig case went cold until 2000, when the investigators reopened it due to the investigations by the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, or NCIS, and FBI. Was Lynette the victim that Armstrong claimed he had dumped out of the car and run over? Well, it seems likely. And officially, Lynette is listed by the FBI as one of Armstrong's victims. Kathleen would say that the family felt relief when they learned that their sister's killer would remain behind bars for the rest of his life. As for why charges had not been specifically brought in the Lynette Hillig case, prosecutor Elizabeth Walker speculated, quote, they got him in Michigan for 5 homicides. He is not getting out. Why should we spend the money, end quote. Well, being practical, I do understand her reasoning. Resources are not infinite. You can imagine all of the digging into records that this is producing, and the outcome would be the same, a lifetime in prison. The FBI in Seattle spent weeks reviewing records, but ultimately reported no unsolved homicides during the relevant time frame. However, connecting Lynette Hillig to his murder confessions may have prompted Armstrong to recant his non-Detroit confessions. As Virginia had the death penalty at the time, it was abolished in 2021. But this meant that Eric had opened himself up to a sentence of death were he to be tried in Virginia for premeditated murder. He had also confessed to murder in Hawaii, with investigators looking into unsolved murders of strangled women. They focused on Lisa Ann Fracassi, who was killed in 1994, not May 1997, as Eric claimed. Records show that the USS Nimitz was not in Hawaii in May 1997, it was on the west coast of the United States. But the Nimitz was in Hawaii in May 1996, making it more likely that Eric's confessed murders occurred then, but it rules out Lisa Fracassi. Unsolved female strangulation murders were discovered in Wilmington, Delaware, and Jacksonville, North Carolina. But when crossing the T's and dotting the I's, they did not seem related to the Armstrong case. So back in Michigan, on April 14, 2000, NCIS began looking into the John Eric Armstrong homicide confessions abroad. His naval personnel file and the USS Nimitz itinerary were reviewed, with NCIS collaborating with the FBI for their interviews. Verifying his inconsistent accounts was incredibly labor-intensive. Commander of the Violent Crimes Task Force, Gerald Cliff, noted that with their own investigation evolving, the Detroit Police Department was still actively involved in these investigations, which could impact factors like bail, potential charges from other jurisdictions, and extradition. Meanwhile, the FBI located a report indicating that Armstrong had returned late to the Nimitz one night in Thailand with his face cut up and bleeding. But that alone wasn't enough for an arrest warrant for murder. Cooperating with NCIS, the Singapore Police Force Intelligence Division reviewed their records, finding no unsolved homicides during the time when the USS Nimitz was in port in December 1995 and January 1996. The same was true for Hong Kong, and after this, the investigation into Armstrong's confessed murders just fizzled out. Detroit news reporter George Hunter also noted that the reason behind the stalled NCI investigation was unclear. Crimes against prostitutes overseas are often not prioritized and can just go unnoticed. These individuals also live off the grid, making it possible that murders occurred without anyone realizing, especially if no bodies were recovered. So ultimately, this resulted in no additional charges against Armstrong for the non-Detroit murder confessions. Doing her due diligence while researching for the book, B.R. Bates requested information from the FBI under FOIA, but received the standard response about the existence of records, not affirming or denying anything. A similar request to NCIS made during the pandemic surprisingly yielded a detailed, though redacted, PDF. NCIS had closed the case on Armstrong on October 12, 2000, after reviewing logs, travel claims, medical records, and conducting interviews. It revealed that Armstrong had been on restricted status due to an unauthorized absence in the Far East in late 1997. And I do wonder if that's when he came back to the Nimitz cut up and bleeding. Now, all this begs to ask, did or didn't Armstrong commit these additional murders that he had confessed to? Well, the answer is we don't know for certain. Now, his lawyer claims he fabricated these confessions, while Detroit detective Everett Monroe believes he did. What could Armstrong gain from making false claims? Well, it is known that some individuals do make false confessions. In my previous episodes, 108 to 112 on Silent Silhouette by George Jarrett and Jennifer Buchholz, the one we just finished, I discussed Henry Lee Lucas, a serial killer who confessed to hundreds of murders, including the still unsolved case of Deborah Sue Williamson in Lubbock, Texas, despite him not having committed these crimes. So people may have a desperate need for attention, which fits Eric Armstrong to a T, or a desire to appear more dangerous, which can lead them to lie in order to gain extra prison privileges, even protection. Additionally, we know that the intensity of interrogation can also lead to false confessions, as we saw in episodes 101 to 105, A Harvest of Innocence, which covered the West Memphis 3 case, and I went into false confession in detail on that. Officer Donald Johnson believes that the murder of the transgender prostitute in Thailand definitely occurred, as the details Armstrong provided were just too precise to dismiss. Johnson said, quote, "When they were going to various ports, it's very easy to do because you're in and you're out. You're right back on the ship. And so he went and he handled his business and he came back on the ship like nothing ever happened." End quote. His partner, Detective James Hines, agrees. Quote, "I think he did. Maybe not as many, but I don't think it was an exaggeration. You get off the boat, you do your dirt, you get on the boat, nobody knows, there's no trace. And they're probably not rushing to an investigation. It's probably something that happened all the time with prostitutes. Maybe those in different countries didn't value their deaths." End quote. Well, sadly, I can see that. Now, one cop told our author that he had heard through the grapevine that the transgender prostitute Armstrong claimed he killed in Thailand was found and that she had survived, although there was no corroborating evidence provided by NCIS to prove this. Detroit patrolman Rodney Durham also believes Armstrong likely killed overseas. He said, quote, "With today's technology, with DNA, I wouldn't be surprised if you could match him with umpteen more killings elsewhere, particularly in North Carolina and Virginia, where he spent so much time." End quote. Well, what of Armstrong's demeanor, of his attitude? Detroit Violent Crime Task Force member Gregory Gelder reflected back on the cases. Quote, "What stands out to me was the nonchalant callousness of Armstrong's confession. He did not appear inherently evil due to his resigned demeanor, but certainly seemed to be by his actions that he described to us. I have wondered about the veracity of Armstrong's claims. I certainly think that it was possible that Armstrong believed he killed some that may in fact have survived." End quote. Well, good point, Mr. Gelder. We know that happened with Nastasia Olniak and Cynthia Smith and even Monica Johnson, who actually died as a result of her injuries. Now, to gain insight into serial murderers such as Armstrong, B.R. Bates interviewed Dr. Lawrence J. Simon, author of Murder by the Numbers, Perspectives on Serial Sexual Violence, which I mentioned before, whose sentiments I opened this episode with. Dr. Simon noticed that serial killers often boast about their crimes, potentially exaggerating their victim count. To verify their claims, he suggests that law enforcement have them draw up a map of where the crimes occurred to aid in recovering bodies and evidence. While Armstrong specifically mentioned streets, locations, and descriptions of the victims, we know that the dates are off. But B.R. Bates also points out that police reports can be misleading. For example, a Chicago police report lists Nicole Young's height as being 5'2", while the Wayne County Medical Examiner notes she is 5'6". Now, no one's perfect, but 4 inches is a lot. What Bates effectively did to sort out fact from fiction was to compare Cynthia Smith's account of her assault with Eric Armstrong's account. Many of the details match, but they did differ in who said what when, and Cynthia's claiming that Eric had some metal object in his hand, like a knife. Now, we do know he used knives in other assaults and killings. Dr. Simon points out that Armstrong is still in prison and could decide to share more details of his non-Detroit murders. Other individuals, quote, have recanted before, but also had produced bodies because they were given something, whether it's running and getting fresh air for 3 or 4 hours in exchange for more information, end quote. Simon does not believe this quid pro quo is wrong, as the goal is recovering bodies and closure for the families. So if the guy wants 5 Big Macs, I say we give Eric Armstrong 5 Big Macs. It'll be worth it to find out more information from him. Now that begs us to consider, and I am paraphrasing now, was Armstrong steps ahead of the detectives, creating this premeditated bargaining chip that he could parlay into something later from prison? Well, maybe. Dr. Catherine Ramsland wrote in her blog on Psychology Today, explaining that her research shows us that there are 3 reasons serial murders inflate their numbers. Quote, 1, they delight in duping law enforcement. 2, they want to be famous. 3, they want to be infamous, the world's worst. End quote.
So what do you think, murder bookies?
What an amazing, interesting woman, a retired professor of forensic psychology. My interview with Dr. Catherine Ramsland will drop shortly, so be alert for that special episode when it drops. So a journalist from Montana, Blake Hempstead, served aboard the Limits with Armstrong beginning in 1993. So speaking to Bates in 2020, Blake Hempstead would say, quote, you work long hours with only the crew about you, and you build friendships because there's no one else day after day. And since we were on an aircraft carrier, we would take Liberty boats from ship to the harbor where you dock. You plan shore leave with the people who can go, with everyone like 8 to 10 people leaving at the same time, end quote. Now, during shore leave, Hempstead would carry his video camera everywhere. When Hempstead looked back through his videos, Eric Armstrong is there until he wasn't. As they all went to do stuff, Armstrong vanished, missing all the fun parts. He would go off and do his own thing. And he also wasn't there on the return trip back to the ship. He never took the same boat back with everyone else. Now, a little side note, don't know what this means, but Blake Hempstead was never questioned by the authorities. Well, given that Armstrong has repeatedly killed, he clearly had the desire to kill. He was presented with opportunities, regardless of where they were, literally any port, Singapore, Thailand, Hong Kong, Hawaii, Seattle. Would he resist this malignant urge to kill? Or would he engage in this deviant behavior? Well, I lean towards him indulging this compulsion that he did kill overseas. But another shipmate, Tony Palmer, defends Armstrong. Quote, I never saw him in trouble at all. He worked hard. You ask him to do something, he got to it right away. About 90% of the time, he had a smile on his face, cracking jokes, just an all-around good guy. End quote. Back in my first episode, 113, on the baby doll serial killer, I mentioned a 2009 Indiana University study on prostitution, accounting for 32% of female victims in all serial murder homicides. But this data changed. In the next decade, this rose to 43%. Now, sex workers represent 0.3% of the U.S. population. Thus, quote, being a prostitute increases your chances of being murdered by 200 times, end quote, writes Eric Hickey, a social psychologist and author of Serial Murders and Their Victims. This is not a safe occupation, nor will it ever be. Bates now explores a vital question. Why are these women on the streets engaging in prostitution in the first place? We've learned about many of their childhoods, beginning like many of ours, fairly normal, with families that face their ups and downs. So was it just a wrong turn somewhere? Bates effectively details each woman's life, showing that they were more than just prostitutes. They were daughters, sisters, nieces, mothers, dancers, athletes, and more. Reaching out to their families for information was challenging. Emails, Facebook messages, LinkedIn invites went unanswered. Despite leaving cards with her contact information at Detroit addresses, she faced repeated rejection. and it was incredibly difficult to find anyone who was willing to share their story. Now, bear with me a minute. The most elusive figure in this investigation was Rose Marie Felt. Bates badly desired to give Rose a three-dimensional description of her life for this book, but found no family attended the trials and no photographs of Rose, after extensive searches, appeared. The lack of information led Bates to suspect that Rose Marie Felt might be a pseudonym. After additional countless hours, Bates did find one person associated with Rose who confirmed her identity as Rose Marie Felt, and some blanks were filled in. Now, this left Nicole Young as the most elusive figure. Unfortunately, no family or friends were found for Nicole, except a former landlady and the mother of a friend of her ex-boyfriend who had only seen Nicole twice. Now, this underscores the heavy impact that entry into sex work has on women and their families, culminating in alienation and isolation. And it provides some insight into the question of why prostitution, and suggests the sex work culture in Detroit significantly influenced the Armstrong case, with this Jekyll and Hyde serial killer murdering the most vulnerable. Looking inside the call girl culture, prostitution has always been tethered to a cycle of addiction in major urban centers, fueled by drugs like heroin and cocaine, creating a stark divide between the haves and the have-nots. Bates observed that Detroit's strip clubs were part of a network that brought in fresh girls from Las Vegas and Los Angeles. Quote, "A woman might have to rent that space on the stage to make her living. After getting hooked on drugs, largely crack at this time, they tended to gravitate from stripping to street walking," end quote, with race and social class irrelevant. It was Cynthia Smith who educated prosecutor Elizabeth Walker about Detroit's prostitution scene, highlighting Michigan Avenue as the creme de la creme. Women came from all over to sell themselves there, which shocked Walker, who only saw the rundown, crime-ridden area and buildings. Drug addict prostitutes were visible, they were thin, jittery, they had a foul smell to them, and gross white spittle stuck to their lips. Even so, suburban driving Johns drove up and down the street with car seats in the back of their vehicles, looking for women to buy. Women were commodities, their pimps plying them with drugs that they had to work to pay for, punctuating their existence with beatings if they didn't make enough cash. Once hooked on drugs, choices vanished as they delved into track houses plentifully located up and down the blocks. When the girls weren't high, they were nice, they were fun and laughing, and then they'd use again. After a few years, women looked twice as old as they were, and police decoy work barely made a dent. Mark Bando worked with the Detroit Police Department in the 1970s to the 1990s, focusing on the prostitution beat while driving the, quote, whorecore, end quote. He created a call girl catalog that documented prostitutes with photographs, birth dates, heights, weights, and fake names. The catalog featured many women with big hair resembling beauty queens. Bando also noted that some of these women felt empowered, often controlling the terms of their encounters with clients, which inflated their egos. While this was not the majority, these were the more attractive women and usually not yet impacted by drugs. Well, I think this mindset may have been a necessary delusion for survival, and none of Armstrong's victims appeared in Bando's extensive catalog. With the rise of the internet, women are no longer seen walking along Michigan Avenue. They have become invisible, relying on online escort services and smartphones, living this hazardous life. Officer Rodney Durham states that, quote, "Desperation can drive people into difficult situations, and it takes understanding and empathy to see their choices," end quote. Many who are offered help refuse due to the anticipated loss of freedom and the agonies of withdrawal from drugs. Many abused and trafficked women often resort to substance to numb their emotional and physical pain as well. And I'm totally editorializing here, but engaging in this work is not a viable career choice and can severely harm both physical and mental health. I am not judging, I'm just drawing a conclusion. Prosecutor Elizabeth Walker explains that, quote, prostitutes are easy targets. They go with whoever's got the money. They anticipate a certain amount of violence, and sometimes it winds up being fatal for them, end quote. Gerald Cliff added a caveat, quote, streetwalkers are probably the most paranoid people, short of cops, that you'll ever meet. For them, it's a survival skill that they need to master in order to continue to function. They need to fear the sexual predator and the cops when they work. Armstrong had to be a practiced liar to have been able to get all these victims to trust him enough to go with him wherever he chose to kill them, end quote. Of Armstrong, Detroit Police Chief Benny Napoleon speculated that he targeted prostitutes because, quote, he didn't believe the police would investigate those murders as aggressively, end quote. James Allen Fox, a criminology professor at Northeastern University, speculates that for Armstrong, quote, preying on prostitutes was a hobby. He did it when he had some free time to kill, end quote. Punny Professor Fox. Oh my God. Free time to kill. In a powerful summary, B.R. Bates writes, quote, we've got the idea that prostitutes will get in a car with anybody who's got the money. These girls are easy to get along, and their desperation may be sharpened by drug addiction. They have no issue going to secluded places where crimes can more easily be committed. Prostitutes are on the lower rung of society and wouldn't be missed, and their cases would not be investigated as aggressively. They're in a high-risk profession, and they are accustomed to violence anyway. And the public sympathy for their deaths is not great, end quote. Well, spot on. She said that beautifully. Serial killers such as Robert Hansen, Gary Ridgway, and John Eric Armstrong targeted prostitutes, deludedly believing that they were cleaning up the streets. Prostitutes are perceived as easier to control, weak, desperate, which fosters greater hatred towards them. Eric Armstrong claimed to feel cheated by the sex workers he killed, although he subsequently robbed them of their money and belongings. Dr. Lawrence Simon addresses this misconception, and this is important. When sex workers disappear, it is often believed they are less missed, leading to reduced efforts to solve their cases. However, homicide detectives take every case seriously, despite the extra challenges involved. Simon notes that cultural attitudes have shifted. For example, hitchhiking was common in the 1970s, but is now very rare. You never do this. He advises women who jog to avoid doing so at night and to stay aware of their surroundings. Situational awareness is key. Ultimately, it is essential that we all value human life. Wendy Jordan's sister, Judy, discussed this in an episode of Discovery's Very Bad Men on Armstrong. Quote, Wendy was worthy. This is not a throwaway that nobody wanted, end quote. I have only scratched the surface of B.R. Bates's research, where she presents victims who were loved by family and friends. She explores them as individuals, their stories and relevant data, a woman after my own heart. However, we still lack a satisfactory answer to the Eric Armstrong question. Why? Why do you kill? I find Armstrong to be intelligent, but by no means a criminal genius. His persona is kind, sweet, a passive guy who helps his friends and cries when he does wrong. And this is a mask, part of that dual personality worn to enable him to pass through society unnoticed, which is what he desired. We have to stop expecting serial killers to look like monsters, because they do not. They are all too normal. And they are very, very good at not revealing the evil that lies beneath. If that mask slips accidentally, it is costly. They cannot control their prey. They cannot exert their will. They cannot indulge themselves in fantasies, deviance, and the violence that they so crave. So letting the mask slip is not an option. It is about normalcy. He married. He had children. He worked a normal job. He served the country. His shipmates spoke of his dislike for prostitutes, believing he wanted nothing to do with them, not ever considering that he hated them enough to kill them. Eric Armstrong has daddy issues, admitting enjoying control, something that was denied to him, possibly by his biological father, early in life, when he became the passive, sensitive, red-haired boy. Eric found satisfaction in killing women because it made him stronger, forcing them to submit. He said he killed a prostitute in Hawaii to get back at his wife after they'd had an argument, with the victim taking the brunt of his anger. See, when you play passive, when you are submissive, you must sublimate the annoyances and anger that you feel, internalizing them until you cannot contain them. Now, remember during the interrogation with Detective Everett Monroe, Eric became enraged, punching that huge, heavy filing cabinet, moving it a few inches. Yeah, his mask slipped. That is John Eric Armstrong, the enraged killer. That's the real guy here. Eric tucked away annoyances, anger, frustration, only unleashing them when he wanted to kill, when it had reached a tipping point. Asked why he'd thrown a victim out the window in Thailand, Armstrong said he was humiliated, frustrated, angry, and out of control. He admitted, quote, "I have no control in killing hookers, except I have control and I will never kill my wife or child," end quote. Of course he wouldn't. He needs them. They help him play the role of compliant, sweet guy Eric. He told the police that he didn't want his son to be fatherless, like he was, and that he loves his toddler son dearly and wants to see his children grow up. Then, gee, why would you make choices to kill women again and again and again? Don't be fooled. He is narcissistic. He is egotistical and selfish, hardly the family man concerned about his family, who are his props. What he does love is control, power, and dominance. How did John Eric Armstrong end up where he is today? Well, in 1973, he was born in New Bern, North Carolina, named after its counterpart in Switzerland, to Linda and John Armstrong. He attended the local elementary school and later went to West Craven High School, which I literally read as Wes Craven, the horror film director. Well, how cool is that to have a high school named after you? But it wasn't. His mother was a licensed practical nurse and also worked as a teaching assistant. In 1978, when Eric was 5, he was profoundly affected by the death of his 2-month-old baby brother, Mikey. Although an autopsy was performed, Eric held his father, John, responsible for Mikey's death. Not long afterward, Eric rode his bike into traffic in a suicide attempt where he expressed his desire to be with Mikey. He would go to a mental health counselor as a result. Linda had chosen not to let Eric attend Mikey's funeral and burial, believing it would protect him, but his therapist later pointed out that Eric had never received the closure that he needed. Now, shortly after Mikey's passing, Eric's father moved out and a divorce followed. Writer Kevin Gray wrote in an article for Detail magazine that Eric found Mikey lifeless in his crib, but then returned to his bed pretending to be asleep. In a letter to Katie, Eric suggested that his baby brother might have been his first victim, saying, quote, There's no way I can live with that guilt, knowing that I killed my little brother without knowing it, end quote. Well, now that's a twist, right? This raises questions. Did Mikey cry and annoy his brother Eric, leading him to cover his mouth to silence him? During Eric's first trial, Dr. Calmaris Dudley testified about Eric's guilt over Mikey's death, whether he accidentally killed him or failed to protect him enough. A childhood friend's grandmother, Judy Avery, shared that at the time there was a rumor circulating in New Bern that suggested that Eric may have had something to do with his little brother's death. Well, like millions of other kids, John Eric enjoyed fishing and playing video games. He was a quirky kid who loved the beach, and his grades typically ranged from B's to C's. Reserved, he often blended in the background, except for his striking red hair. Around 6th grade, he decided to go by his middle name, Eric, dropping John. Dana, a schoolmate, described him as goofy and polite, although sometimes he had a bit of a temper. Although introverted, he participated in school activities, and he was involved with the National Avenue Baptist Youth Group. Close friend's grandmother, Judy Avery, had a very special bond with Eric. She acknowledged that while he was sweet, he also had his struggles. At the time, Eric lived with his mother and stepfather Ron in a trailer park, and Judy described Eric as, quote, this neatly dressed kid who never used foul language, end quote. When it came time for Eric's baptism, he felt very anxious. He was afraid of being around the men, and he wanted Miss Judy to accompany him. But with her encouragement and her support, he found the courage to go through with the baptism. After his arrest, Eric Armstrong accused his biological father of sexual molestation. Was this accusation a tactic by a serial killer to gain sympathy for his insanity defense, or was it true? Linda recalled that age 2, Eric broke his leg after falling from a window while his father was supposed to be watching him. After the abuse claim, Linda was confused. She and her son had a good relationship, so why hadn't he told her? She would have helped him. Co-worker Jennifer Westberg from Eric's Target days remembers him expressing resentment towards both his parents, blaming them for his younger brother's death. During his high school years, Eric was hospitalized for 30 days following a breakup with his girlfriend, feeling suicidal and still fixated on brother Mikey's death. Judy recalls an outing with the church group where Eric experienced severe anxiety and hyperventilation, requiring the van to pull over for him to recover. But there was also normalcy. Eric attended his 2 high school proms and held a part-time job, where co-workers described him as a sweet guy, quote, tall, lanky, kind, not really self-confident, but had a great sense of humor. A hard worker, he never complained when he was asked to do the duties that weren't actually his, end quote. She also recalled that he had migraines, which were rather serious. Eric graduated in June 1992 and joined the Navy, going to boot camp in Florida that November. During his time on the USS Nimitz, he worked as a barber and aviation fueler. In 1994, NCIS records indicate he faced financial difficulties and he had some issues with his best friend, but the situations eventually resolved themselves. He did suffer from migraines, but a CAT scan showed no abnormalities. Nicknamed Opie after the character from the Andy Griffith Show, Eric was known to be timid and reserved. He declined invitations to drink with his shipmates and showed no interest in girls. A female sailor that he trained mentioned they occasionally went out for drinks and to get tattoos, at no time feeling unsafe or at risk. His shipmates describe him as having a great sense of humor and being very sweet. After he met Katie, they became inseparable, marrying in the fall of 1998, with Katie becoming pregnant. After 6 years' service, they were both honorably discharged. He unsuccessfully applied for a job with the Virginia State Police, prompting the move to Michigan, and they would welcome a son traveling to North Carolina for his baptism. Katie was pregnant again when Eric was arrested. Now, journalist Blake Hempstead observes that life on a Navy vessel can be close quarters, with crew members spending 16 hours a day together. Teasing, bullying, and hazing can occur. Blake wonders whether these experiences triggered Armstrong's violence. He says Opie was gentle, making him a target for playful wrestling matches that may have ignited a concealed rage in Eric. However, he and other shipmates insist they never meant to harm Eric. But to be fair, the USS Nimitz has faced hazing issues in the past. Kim Jones, who also served with Eric, shared her experiences of being belittled by a racist and sexist captain, while she remembers her time with Eric fondly. Keep in mind, when discussing his Navy experience with law enforcement, Eric expressed pride and spoke positively about it. Kim was still on the Nimitz when she learned of Eric's arrest and was shocked, as was everyone else who knew him. Everyone found it hard to believe that Eric could commit such terrible acts. He has absolute control over that mask of his. Now, Eric and Katie Armstrong were living with her parents, and he often complained to co-worker Jennifer Westberg about his mother-in-law. He was frustrated by the lack of intimacy with Katie, who felt too tired or didn't want sex with her mother and her son in the same house, a reason why Eric was so gung-ho to move out. And here comes another twist. Could this story get any more complex? Well, yes, it can. Shannon, Kelly Hood's sister, spoke about the defense throwing Eric's family under the bus, referring to the attempt to get Eric acquitted on the basis of an insanity defense. Shannon doubted Eric's claims of a troubled family, particularly regarding the sexual abuse allegations against his biological father, John Ezra Armstrong, who had no idea his son was on trial, let alone convicted. He hadn't had contact with Eric since his marriage to Linda ended. After 10 years in prison, Eric's half-brother, Michael Armstrong, who has never met Eric, found out what had transpired and spoke out. And yes, the half-brother is named Michael. Now, Eric's dad, John Ezra Armstrong, was born in 1946 and served honorably in the Marine Corps during the Vietnam War, and later moved on with his life, marrying a woman named Pat, and together they had son Sean. This marriage did not last, and they divorced. In 1973, John Ezra married Linda, and they had 2 sons, John Eric and Paul Michael, later known as Mikey. And Mikey died when he was 2 months old. Half-brother Michael Armstrong knows that the autopsy confirmed little Mikey's death was from SIDS and dismisses any notion that his father was responsible. He told B.R. Bates that his father and Linda's marriage ended after Linda had cheated on him. His dad then moved to Oklahoma, where he met and married Michael's mother, Loretta Smith, raising her 2 children, Steve and Amy, as his own. John's oldest son, Sean, also lived with John and Loretta until Sean went off and got married. So that's quite some time. Michael was 8 when John and Loretta divorced. And of his dad, Michael says, quote, "I loved my dad. He was and always will be my hero," end quote. Now, after Michael's grandmother passed, John Ezra's mother, John Ezra returned for the funeral, and Michael then went and moved back in with his dad, who he calls a great man. Michael strongly denies any allegations of abuse. He states, quote, "My dad had 3 biological sons, Sean, John Eric, and me. We're all half-brothers. He also raised my other half-siblings and 4 grandkids. Not one of us has ever been harmed by him. He was very protective of us all. My mom and brothers agree. There is absolutely no way my dad is a sexual predator or child molester, end quote. He also says further, quote, research has shown me that people with issues like John Eric tend to project their anger and/or problems on victims that remind them of their abusers. So if he was allegedly choking female prostitutes, that would immediately make me look at his mother. He blamed Dad, who wasn't in the picture, and made an easy scapegoat, end quote. Michael shared that his father only learned about Eric's crimes months before his own death, which left him angry and disappointed. Michael Armstrong also expressed his condolences to the victims' families and called his half-brother Eric a monster. So, what do we think? Was John Eric Armstrong abused? Well, I doubt it, given that his father had raised 5 other children and 4 grandchildren without accusations of abuse. Cheryl McMcCollum, an amazing investigator and host of the Zone 7 podcast, has said there are no part-time pedophiles. They are at it 24/7. So ultimately, I choose to give the benefit of the doubt to those who are not serial killers, given that serial killers may want to minimize their own responsibility for their actions. Eric also says he protected his little brother from his predator father, which provides more evidence of Eric's hero complex. He wanted to be a policeman. He claims he fought off a burglar who broke into work and he suffered injury. He claimed he found the dead prostitute in the river. He was a good Samaritan. All hero complex and no actual hero. Did Eric Armstrong murder his brother Mikey? Well, I guess it's possible, but unlikely, because an autopsy would have revealed physical evidence, and I don't think a 5-year-old would be capable of committing the perfect crime. Regarding his hatred towards prostitutes, any anger seems rooted in John Eric's mind, centering around control and domination. Now, this is a simplistic explanation, but recall that Eric was rejected by his high school girlfriend, who threw him over after another boy gave her gifts, buying her affection. Amplify that when Eric's wife rejects him sexually, given she's a new mother living in her parents' home and is pregnant and tired. Whatever anger became associated with women is ultimately the product of John Eric Armstrong's mind. I am not throwing any of his biological parents or step-parents under the bus and accusing them of abuse. When it comes down to it, I give them the benefit of the doubt, not the serial killer, who seeks to minimize his responsibility for too many premeditated and gruesome murders. B.R. Bates wraps up the baby doll serial killer, delving into serial murder, comparing and contrasting. And I will refrain from delving into all the wonderful details that she represents, because I just can't tell you everything. But B.R. Bates points out serial killer strangulation is the second most common method of killing, 23.2%. Shooting is the number 1 method, coming in at 41.8%. So Armstrong's MO is rather standard for serial killing. Concerning motive, what category does Armstrong fit? Keep in mind that these categories do overlap and blur into each other. Missionaries who are literally on a mission to remove people who fit some negative criteria from society, well, in this case, possibly prostitutes. Or hedonist who seeks pleasure, whether from sexual satisfaction, profit, or gain. Or perhaps they're thrill seekers who like to play games, lead a merry chase, and mock the police for failure to capture him. Or a third type, power seekers, who want to control others, exerting power and domination. Yeah, Armstrong is a power seeker to a T. I don't see him as a visionary, which represents like 1% of all serial killers, and these are really truly psychotic, with delusions and hallucinations and the whole thing, full-blown psychosis. Bates also examines the dichotomy between organized and disorganized serial killers, stemming from crime scene behavioral analysis. Please recognize that this is a spectrum, and we are describing the most extreme scenarios. Serial killers are all unique, and their actual behavior falls along a continuum. The ideal organized serial killer often has sex prior to killing, bringing weapons he plans to use with him, with pre-planning in evidence. Or, at the opposite ends of the spectrum, the disorganized, who use a weapon of opportunity taken from the crime scene, a kitchen knife, a log found in a yard, who may torture and disfigure the body, who practice necrophilia. He's unsophisticated and leaves a mess of a crime scene and just about never stages a scene. Organized killers take souvenirs, they drive to and from the scene, and will conceal a body, and he follows the news. The disorganized killer walks or uses public transportation and will leave or dump a body without concealment. Organized killers are more intelligent and also choose low-risk victims, while the disorganized targets high-risk victims such as sex workers. The disorganized are less attractive, less confident, work menial jobs, and can be socially awkward. Now, based on this, I believe Armstrong's behavior fits the mixed category, his behaviors combining aspects of organized and disorganized. He targets high-risk victims, disorganized. He has sex, then murders, organized, killing effectively and quickly. He kills when angry, when his father's face appears before his eyes, disorganized. He poses the women after death, humiliating them, organized. He dumps bodies without concealment, disorganized. And finally, the organized serial killer watches the news and may offer to help police, like calling in a body he killed and threw down into the river below. He is act-focused, killing quickly, rather than process-focused, lingering over the victim, for example, strangling and resuscitating them repeatedly. Detroit cop Everett Monroe was the officer who noticed that Armstrong had returned to the railroad dump site and rearranged the clothing worn by his victims. When asked about this, Eric claimed he was trying to make them presentable. No way. That is laughable. That does not add up. Posing the victims with their genitalia exposed contradicts that idea completely. He also swapped the clothing among the victims, which serves several psychological purposes. First, it reinforces his sense of control, and the victims don't deserve the individuality that clothing provides. They are his to do with what he wants. Playthings, revealing every ounce of contempt he has for them. This is why he poses them so demeaningly, spread eagle, to humiliate, embarrass. They're props that he vents his aggression, frustration, anger, and lust on them. Second, he revisits his memory of the kills and commits necrophilia while reliving his fantasies once again. Yes, he went back and had sex with the dead bodies. He was spiraling, escalating, and getting somewhat out of control for a guy seeking control. And this wouldn't have seemed like risky behavior to him, although it definitely was, because the more time one spends with a dead body, the greater the likelihood of discovery. Many children experience dysfunctional childhoods marked by alcohol, drug abuse, weak attachment to parents and caregivers, and exposure to criminal and unhealthy sexual behaviors. These factors often leave them feeling belittled, anxious, and humiliated. Dr. Lawrence Simon says, quote, "Inconsistent parenting is significant as children don't know what to expect each day," end quote. Yeah, there's nothing that they can count on. Love and warmth are often absent, and trauma, such as the death of a sibling, can leave lasting scars that remain unhealed. I have observed that many serial killers harbor an intense hatred for their mothers, which becomes intertwined with their sexual desires. This connection often erodes their ability to empathize, a trait already compromised by low self-esteem and a lack of trust. Consequently, for these individuals, sex becomes intertwined with violence, and their emotional and psychological foundations are severely damaged, even absent. Children like Eric, who feel they have no control over their own lives, often grow into narcissistic predators. In Eric's case, he's seeking to exert control over others, prostitutes, whom he despises. It's the perfect storm. Dr. Simon also says that very rarely will a serial killer, quote, jump into sexual homicide rages without leaving a few footprints behind by either committing some type of bizarre offense or other deviant behavior someone close to them observed after he was arrested, end quote. Well, I'm not certain what Eric's footprints are, but I suspect he may have harmed animals in his youth. And fortunately, serial killers are quite rare. The final section of The Baby Doll Serial Killer provides a concise exploration of serial murder by highlighting key concepts and examples from cases like Gary Ridgway, Ed Gein, Ed Kemper, Jeff Dahmer, and Dennis Rader. So be sure to read the book. Returning to those early interrogation hours, Detroit police officer Donald Johnson listened to Eric speak about his life, his marriage, and thoughts for hours. Johnson believes this monster's creation was environmental, his maladjusted internal dialogue finding expression by strangling prostitutes during sex. Then he'd throw the victims away, but return to make sure that no one else had sex with his bodies, satisfied that he would never again be rejected. And he returned until he could no longer stand the smell. Oh. Johnson said that this behavior was far more than just, quote, I'm going to kill someone because I have some underlying issues that I've dealt with since childhood, end quote, that have now come to play in his adult life. John Eric Armstrong is apt at keeping his secret. He maintained his Opie persona so convincingly, his wife Katie was blindsided by his arrest. She fell into a strong state of denial, furious at how her husband was being railroaded, no pun intended. Interestingly, her body language and demeanor towards him during court proceedings was demeaning. She criticized him for being a hillbilly and for being too passive. In writer Kevin Gray's article in Detail magazine, Katie remarked, quote, my husband is the kind of person who cries when he sees a dead animal. If you yell at him, he cries, end quote. She did admit that Eric suggested she dress up like a prostitute during their intimate moments. Oh boy. Huh. Well, Katie did not respond to B.R. Bates' request for an interview, so I will leave that at that. Save for this one thing I thought about. This revelation about dressing as a prostitute for their sexual encounters made me wonder if Eric ever asked Katie to play dead for him. I suspect he did, and she refused. Most necrophiles are heterosexual males between the ages of 20 and 50. In Rossman-Resnick's study, Sexual Attraction to Corpses, a psychiatric view of necrophilia, describes the characteristics of a necrophile: poor self-esteem, suffered trauma, and the absence of a biological father. 68% are motivated by a desire for a non-rejecting partner and want to overcome feelings of isolation. 12% try to remedy an inferiority complex by acquiring power over a corpse. Well, this describes everything we've said about John Eric Armstrong. Recall that he told Officer Hines that one of his victims laughed at his small penis? Well, was that one factor that contributed to rejection and his sense of inferiority? When Armstrong reported discovering Wendy Jordan's body, did he want to get caught? Retired Dearborn Heights cop Jim Isaluk notes that psychopaths are curious about investigations taking place and take pride in their actions. Armstrong believed he was clever enough to avoid detection when he pointed out the body. When Eric was detained, he was genuinely surprised and had expected to go on without consequences. Once caught, he confessed seeking recognition. The darkness within him felt proud, while his vulnerable side cried and apologized. No, he was not trying to get caught. What about migraines and blackouts that Armstrong claimed to experience? Well, during an adrenaline rush in a state of rage, it is easy to lose track of events. And Dr. Simon suspects this may be why many serial killers return to the scene of the crime and engage with bodies, because they're fuzzy about the details due to this blackout. During Eric's trial, a psychologist diagnosed him with intermittent explosive disorder. Well, was this true or false? All right, IED occurs in approximately 2.7% of the population and is defined in DSM-5 as, quote, recurrent behavioral outburst representing failure to control aggressive impulses as manifest by the verbal, temper tantrums, tirades, arguments, and behavior which involves the destruction of property, physical assault against animals or people 3 times in a 12-month period, end quote. It can begin in childhood, can involve drugs and alcohol, as well as suicidal ideation. Nature and nurture can play a role, especially if a child grows up in an aggressive home, inheriting warrior genes, or possesses abnormalities of the brain's limbic system, the emotional center. Children who were abused tend to manifest this disorder more often. It is more common in males younger than 35 years of age who have intimacy problems. Some of that rings true for him. Survivor Zelda Jacobowski observed that Armstrong's behavior was calculated. He stalked her before his violent outburst. Officer Ira Todd witnessed Eric's rage when he punched that filing cabinet, triggered by discussions about his childhood, not his wife or sex workers. Todd believes Eric's display of remorse were strategic, intended to be recorded for the court. Quote, he was clearly intelligent, playing to our comments while planning his defense, end quote. Note, this is the same man who wanted to hug a teddy bear during his perp walk. John Eric Armstrong met with B.R. Bates at the G. Robert Cotton Correctional Facility in Jackson, Michigan. They sat in plastic chairs with no barricade, and Bates questioned at first if she had the right prisoner due to his friendly smile and warm demeanor. Armstrong rarely receives visitors, only his mom and stepfather every couple years. He feels sad about not hearing from his ex-wife, son, or the daughter he's never met, and he refused to discuss his case with Bates. A serial killer is rare, and a medley of factors contribute to this behavior. While the reasons may be elusive, significant red flags in John Eric Armstrong's life have been identified. Ultimately, he bears the responsibility for the death and destruction he caused. And this concludes The Baby Doll Serial Killer, The John Eric Armstrong Homicides by B.R. Bates with Gerald Cliff, Ph.D. It is one of my favorite true crime books, exploring every nuance of this story, and I highly recommend it to true crime enthusiasts. My interview with B.R. Bates and Dr. Jerry Cliff will drop in 2 weeks. You do not want to miss hearing from them, so subscribe so you don't miss a thing. And our next book. Thank you, Patreon murder bookies. It is 16 minutes. Was the death of baby Matthew an accident or murder? By Diane Marger Moore. March 6, 1993. A fire broke out in a nursery in Indianapolis, Indiana. 16 minutes later, firefighters extinguished the blaze, revealing a room so severely burned everything was unrecognizable. And then faces fell. Firefighters were told to look for a newborn baby boy. Only 2 people were home when the fire erupted: baby Matthew's parents. Fire investigators deemed the incident suspicious. While the initial prosecutor was uninterested in pursuing the case, the new arson prosecutor, Diane Marger Moore, was determined to seek justice for baby Matthew Wise. 16 Minutes Part 1 will drop after my interview with B.R. Bates and Jerry Cliff. Thank you for listening. I love to hear your thoughts and comments at jill@murdershelfbookclub.com or connect with me on X, Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube. You can also join my Patreon for $4 a month to help me choose the next book coming off the murder shelf. My sources, pictures, food, drink, and everything else can be found on my blog at www.murdershelfbookclub.com. I'll see you in 2 weeks. I see you as you hear me.
Good morning, Earth. It's time to get up.
Dial in for strange and wonderful stories told by even stranger and more wonderful people.
And remember, if you've heard it, it's history. If you haven't, it's news. I'm Blue.
And I'm Scott. And welcome to 87.9 WKMU, where you'll find all the things that keep me up.
From gaming and movies to UFOs and just random weirdness in our dimension.
So tune in at wkmu.podbean.com.
Yeah, and do it quick before the government shuts us down. We gotta go, guys. Just make sure you check on yourself and check on your friends.
And everyone deserves love, especially you.
This concludes our broadcast day.
Written and produced by Jill, all rights reserved. Music, The Pewter Elephant by Blue Dot Sessions.